Welcome to the P.A.S. Report Weekly Roundup Podcast. The P.A.S. Report provides an honest analysis on the critical issues that matter to you without the biased media filters. Here's your host, Professor Nicholas Giordano.
What's up, everyone? Welcome to the P.A.S. Report Podcast. This is your host, Nick Giordano, and I hope you enjoyed your weekend. Obviously, the 800-pound gorilla in the room is the federal indictment of former President Trump. There are so many questions surrounding the indictment and what this indictment means for the United States. You know, Rubicon has been crossed, and everything changes now. On Tuesday, the former president, he's going to have to surrender in federal court, and I want you to think about what that image looks like to the rest of the world. And the truth is that nobody knows how this all plays out, even though some might be speculating. I mean, it's really difficult to see where and how this all ends. I will give my thoughts on the Trump indictment on Wednesday after the arraignment because I want to see what happens on Tuesday, as well as what it means for our political system going forward, because it really, there are some real consequences that stem from this that we need to discuss. So I'll get to that on Wednesday. For today's guest, I have author and professor coming on, Dr. Stanley Ridgley. He's a full professor at Drexel University, a former Army intelligence officer, and the author of Brutal Minds, The Dark World of Left-Wing Brainwashing in Our Universities. You know, the far left has hijacked the university system long ago, and it was always about indoctrinating the student body, right? That's what we focused on mostly. But as Professor Ridgley points out, and rightly points out, today's higher education landscape goes far beyond indoctrination. It's now full-on brainwashing throughout the education system, from kindergarten all the way to graduating college. This is one of the biggest challenges we face because everything in the university system will ultimately bleed out into the rest of society. So, Professor Ridgley, can't wait to have this conversation. Welcome to the PAS Report. How are you today?
Thanks so much. It's a pleasure to be here and to talk about one of the most pressing issues facing America today. It's the decline of our higher education system, who's doing it, and what we can do about it.
It's such an important topic. And one of the things that really jumped out at me when I was reading your book is that you say it's the anti-intellectual takeover. And this is very important in the world of academia, where you have a bunch of people that are posing as intellectuals, but they're not about intellectualism. They're not about trying to seek out the truth or asking questions to get students to think critically. It's been about indoctrination, but it's moved further than that, as you explained. So can you explain to the audience what you mean?
Yeah, certainly. When we think of intellectuals, we think of people who are associated with ideas, who are exploring ideas, who have an open mind, who want to exchange views on various issues. It comes out of the tradition of the American university, which comes out of the German university, the idea of a repository of the best that has been thought and said, based on logic, reason, scientific method, inquiry, progress, improving the human condition, and then passing that patrimony on to the next generations for them to build on. Now, the anti-intellectualists who are growing on our college campus, their presence is ever growing on our college campuses, don't think of the university that way. In fact, they view the university as a crucible of indoctrination, that they have been admitted into the halls of truth with their particular ideology, which happens to be crypto-Maoist and Marxist. And as a result, they believe that in imposing a very primitive ideology on the college campus, it's a binary, Manichaean binary of good and evil. I say evil and good, oppressors and oppressed, exploiters and exploited, heretics and believers. And of course, they are the believers and we are the heretics. And we, you and me, Nick, and the rest of most of your listeners probably are burdened with false consciousness. We simply don't know what the reality, the social reality around us. And these folks are blessed with what they call critical consciousness, which is the idea that they can peer into society and see its contradictions, see the relationship of power and privilege. And the problem for them is to bring us to critical consciousness, which is basically indoctrination.
It is. And it's been getting worse and worse throughout the years. I mean, we just had an example recently, and I forget the college that it was on, but where a college professor actually solicited donations from her students for extra credit. And if you didn't contribute to her and her left-wing causes, particularly one was a pro-choice movement, pro-abortion movement, then the student wouldn't be able to get extra credit. At what point did academia change? I mean, let's be honest here. Academia has been controlled by the left for quite some time. It's not like this is really new. We've been hearing calls about progressive indoctrination for 40 years. But something over the course of the last 10 years has changed. And you say it's a movement towards re-education camps. That's what the real goal is in mind. Can you explain that?
I certainly can. The change has accelerated. Basically, the conception of the university I explained a moment ago involves liberals and some conservatives, very few conservatives, but there's been a mutual respect and a kind of the idea that we'll exchange these ideas within the arena in which we dwell. The left, the radical left, in the last 20 to 10 years, has been wanting to change the notion of what that arena consists of, so that arena will no longer exist. The problem emerges, and I'll go ahead and say it, from education schools of education. These are the least respected units on most college campuses, and they have been struggling to impose and extend their influence for many years, and they found a key to it. And the key to extending their influence on the college campuses, generally speaking, was to create a raft of graduate programs in student affairs, higher education management, educational leadership, and then to graduate these people not into academia as faculty, but to graduate them to come back into the side door of the university in the bureaucracy. The bureaucracy, and this is important for a very specific reason. Samuel Abrams at Sarah Lawrence College has noted that while the faculty is 6-1 liberal to conservative, the bureaucracies are 12-1 liberal to conservative. This is important because bureaucracies establish and control the milieu that students find themselves in, and they have as their goal to extend messaging 24/7 to college students in residence life, in dorms, in dining halls, wherever they have access to students. What is this ideology? Well, education schools were colonized a long time ago by crypto Maoists, with Henry Giroux, Michael Apple, Paulo Freire, all of them Marxists, acknowledged Marxists. And this ideology permeates education schools and has found a way out of education schools back into the university, where these bureaucrats extend their influence in what is called the co-curriculum. Now, most people that I've talked to outside the university have no idea what the co-curriculum is. Now, you and I teach in the curriculum. You have physics and chemistry and business and political science. Over here is the co-curriculum that is constructed by the student affairs bureaucracy. And this is a series of workshops and caucuses and a whole array of activities that are controlled by a group of people who adhere to a single ideology. Now, this is the problem that most people are really unaware of. And it's this bureaucracy that is what I think has been the motive force behind altering the university in the last 10 to 15 years, funded by, I should say that is influenced by and is caused by the education schools. Now, when the education schools put these bureaucrats into their positions, these people then coagulate, or should say congregate, off campus in what are called professional clubs. And these clubs are riven with ideology, and these clubs set the standards for what is taught in education schools. So you see a kind of a circle of vice. And this circle of vice was created about 15 years ago, and it is increasing its intensity, and it's increasing its influence. And this is the core of the problem that we find in higher education, the lack of ability to reform higher education.
And you just brought up several very interesting points, things that need to be flushed out more. Now, one of the things I will touch on is the idea of the progressive to conservative ratio on college campuses, as you pointed out, is 6-1. However, if you actually break it down in subject areas, so if you go into anthropology, it's like 85-0. If you go into sociology, it's about 65-1. Political science isn't too bad. It's only about 8-1. History is about 16-1. So we've seen the impact that has had, where you have professors teaching this virulent anti-American sentiment to the students, and we're seeing its impact. But you just brought up something even more important. And it's the idea of the student activities and the clubs that are going on campus, the indoctrination centers that exist. What many don't realize, and I think that this differentiates the university system from the community college system. So I teach in a community college system. And I have found it is far less political and ideological than the university system, and mainly because of that. Because commuter schools are community colleges where students aren't staying on campus all day, every day, 24/7. Some of them may engage in campus activities, but the vast majority have work full time. They may have to take care of children or elderly parents. So they're not there's a much more even split amongst conservatives and progressives on community college campuses. Where on the university system, the conservatives are far outnumbered. And one of the things, it's had a chilling effect where we've seen conservatives self-censor themselves. And not just conservatives, it is now extending a little bit more leftwards as left-leaning professors are now being targeted as well. Yeah. So when we look at that, that's such a great point. As far as why the American people should care, how this actually bleeds out into the broader society, because I think that's the key. You know, people out there may say, well, you know what? I don't have kids in college anymore. My kids graduated. They're not in the college system, or my kids are so young, so I don't have to think about the college system. Can you just explain how this is bleeding out into the broader society?
Yeah, certainly. I think we all should be concerned about it because it influences or impacts, determines the destiny of our country. The folks who are coming out of higher education now, the students who are graduating, I'll give you an example. We saw the campaign, the failed campaign Bud Light just engaged in. This, people don't realize the senior vice president was a very young woman who had come out of Harvard. Not Harvard. Well, she came out of Harvard undergraduate school, and she came out of Wharton graduate, got her MBA at Wharton, and she seemed more concerned with propagating the social engineering project rather than maintaining one of America's great brands that had grown. It was carefully crafted.
Business 101, know your audience.
Yes, it was marketing 101. Yeah, basically a brand that had been carefully crafted and built up over decades was destroyed in the period of about 36 hours. And she managed to do this by simply ignoring everything that we know about marketing and business and taking care of your customers, and that brands actually mean something. And she destroyed. Why did she do this? One of the reasons she did this was because she showed allegiance or fealty to a theory that she probably learned. I'm best guessing she learned it at Harvard and carried it on with her to Wharton. Wharton is an especially interesting case of how these young people are being, put out into society and then acting according not to fundamentals of business or fundamentals of what we know about economics and about politics and about society, but according to a theory that they learned in school that has no basis in reality. It's Wharton. I was just looking at the Wharton site the other day, and I looked at a quote that they're highlighting on the Wharton book, and it was a young woman who was excited to become a Wharton MBA, and she's there, and the quote was, "I feel comfortable enough to make myself vulnerable." Now, that makes no sense. I would rather have someone who's going to learn some hardcore business principles and to act in a way that's going to take care of shareholders and ensure that the brand thrives and ensures that people are getting what they want at a price they're willing to pay. But here she's kind of a narcissistic kind of Generation Z attitude that, well, I feel so comfortable enough to be vulnerable. That makes no sense in the context of a business school or in itself. That's the kind of deleterious result that I'm seeing, that people feel it's okay to do this kind of public psychotherapy, self-psychotherapy, make these kinds of comments, and to think it's being profound or in some way. So I think we all should be concerned about the results of what's going on the college campus and who's in charge, who is calling the shots, because they're producing a generation of people just like this, like the woman who ran the Bud Light campaign, the woman I just mentioned to you on the Wharton website. More and more of these people are assuming positions of power and controlling what we see and controlling largely and to greater extent what we do each day, the choices we have available to us. Rather than improving the human condition, I think that they are involved in doing something more nefarious.
I believe that's key, because what you're talking about is how this has been ongoing for quite some time. We are now seeing the effects of this, that these people go into these positions teaching and brainwashing the student body, knowing full well that one day these students are going to be the future leaders in business, in law, in medicine, in science, in public policy. Now, we're going to take a quick break. When we get back, I want to talk about the radical DEI, how it's changing our society, how it may create a backlash against higher education. So everyone, sit tight. We'll be right back. Listen up, P.A.S. report audience. Experts say that China is hoarding a massive amount of food. They're soon going to have over 2/3 of the globe's corn reserves, over half its rice reserves, and over half its wheat reserves. But when asked about it, China lies. And one expert says that they, of course, will never admit to doing something like that. Well, what does China know that we don't? When it comes to the global food shortages, China is the canary in the coal mine. And you have to understand, China is the world's #1 food importer. They rely on the rest of the world to keep their people fed, so they can't afford to mess up. There'll be riots, civil panic, or even worse, when over 1 billion people can't eat. It's going to create a crisis for them. What does that mean for us? What does that mean for Americans like me and you? Food shortages. That's why it's a smart idea to stock up on a kit of the best-selling 4 Patriot survival food. Create your own stockpile of the best-selling 4 Patriot survival food kits. It's hand-packed in the United States. The kits are compact, stack easily. They have different delicious breakfasts, lunches, and dinners, and I can attest to that because I use 4 Patriots, and their 5-star reviews on the website rave about the flavor and taste. Right now, you can get 10% off your first purchase of 4 Patriot survival food by typing in the code PAS at checkout. Just go to 4patriots.com, use code PAS to get 10% off your first purchase of 4 Patriot survival food. That's 4patriots.com. Use code PAS. Welcome back, everyone. Now, before the break, Dr. Ridgley, we were talking about how the brainwashing that's going on in these college campuses is going to one day translate into literally every single industry. I mean, we're starting to see it now, right? Business, law, medicine, science, public policy, teaching, whatever it may be. We see this radical diversity, equity, inclusion, and social justice push in all aspects of our lives. And I have written numerous pieces for Campus Reform about this issue. When you watch this push that's now part of every single degree program in colleges throughout the United States, I mean, there's only a handful of colleges that don't have this included in their degree programs, but we're seeing this in medical schools where an OBGYN, they're now trying to dilute what gender really means, which does a disservice to their own professions. Do you think that there is so much damage the university is inflicting on themselves all through self-inflicted wounds? This is all intentional. They're hurting themselves. Do you think they're going to be facing a reckoning over the next few years?
One hopes that the reckoning is coming, and I'm hoping it's coming sooner than the next few years. I think we see some glimmers of what is possible happening in Florida, certainly happening in Texas and in Iowa. And I'm just delighted to see that there is a pushback on this. And a rollback, if you will. I think that the diversity, equity, and inclusion is a special example, a special case of my PhD is in Soviet ideology, and I date myself with that because I came out of university back in the late 80s, just as the Soviet Union was crumbling. So I know a great deal about Soviet ideology and how they utilized the bureaucracy to control institutions like the military. And I see DEI as a kind of a corollary analog of the old NKVD commissariat that controlled the military. You've got this separate hierarchy of people who are concerned not with education of young people, not concerned with producing wealth, not concerned with bettering the human condition, but concerned with ideological orthodoxy. And these persons in the DEI hierarchy, they don't really know anything. They don't really do anything except ensure the loyalty and the fealty and the knee-jerk, I would say, genuflections of the faculty and staff and students to a particular ideology, which is grounded in this Manichaean binary I mentioned earlier. That's what they do, up and down the line. It's not clear who they report to or what their powers are. Do they report to the department where they're assigned, or do they report to this hierarchy over here, very much like the NKVD officer, the political commissars used to do? And I think this is one of the most noxious aspects of this new regime that came out of, unfortunately, the death of George Floyd in 2020, ignited the left and made them bold. It emboldened them to push forward on a host of fronts, not just the DEI front, but a host of fronts to enact what they had always dreamed of. And in other words, transforming higher education. These are not intellectuals. These are not faculty. These are people who are occupy the bureaucrat positions. And one of the mottos of one of these off-campus groups that I've mentioned that sets the standards for education schools, the motto is boldly transforming higher education. Now, who are these people that are boldly transforming higher education? No one asked them to transform anything. We just want them to make sure the sound system works and the pizza's hot. That's what their jobs are. and organized karaoke night and an ultimate game of frisbee, rather a game of ultimate frisbee, and yet here we find themselves climbing this ladder of the self-description of we're college educators too, and we're going to establish a co-curriculum of fake faculty, fake courses, fake transcripts. Even we have Rutgers and St. John's giving these fake transcripts for these fake courses taught by these fake faculty, and people are simply unaware that this is what is happening. Even my faculty colleagues, God bless them, many of them continue to cast their gaze off the campus at the far right, at state legislators who simply don't understand these deep issues, perhaps even a Bible thumper or two, parents who don't really understand the issues. This is who they're focused on.
Domestic terrorists.
Yeah, yes, they're focused on these folks over here when the enemy is already inside the wire, right behind them. They despise faculty. They want to be faculty too. They're upset because they can't be faculty. And so they teach these fake classes and they call themselves at their conferences college educators. I've read their material. I've read their books. It's really a pathetic enterprise all the way around. But the problem is that they have a lot of power. And they have this 12-to-1 cant of liberal to conservative, and they are engaged. You ask yourself, I'll tell you what, I had a conversation with a German faculty member the other day, and I said, this group wants to, quote, boldly change higher education, boldly transforming higher education. And he, of course, threw his hands up in a very German way and he said, that could mean anything. Of course, it's subject to interpretation. I said, you know what, in a perfect world, perfect information, you might be right, but we don't have to interpret what they mean. We know exactly how they're transforming higher education and what their aspirations are. Their aspirations as a university, as a crucible of indoctrination. Frederick Jameson was a famous Marxist from my my graduate days at Duke. He was at Duke, and he said this: the purpose of college is to prepare students for the struggles for the Marxist future. That's very, salute to his candor in this, and that's what they're all about. And I accosted my German colleague and I said, I'm sorry, but why do you think these people don't mean what they say? I mean, that seems to be the reaction I get from most faculty. Well, these people are just pontificating, they're just intellectualizing. I said, no, they're not. They're telling you exactly what they're going to do and you're ignoring it. I think we've seen a number of times in history where that's happened, where people have said, I'm going to do this, and we ignore them to our peril.
Absolutely. And I see it with the DEISJ stuff because it's hysterical. When you actually confront them on it, they'll be like, well, we're promoting diversity. We love diversity and we think diversity is important. And then I'll sit there and say, first of all, diversity has been embedded in the college system for like the last 30 years. You've been pushing diversity. Nobody has a problem with diversity. America itself has been diverse since the beginning, since our founding. Mm-hmm. And they tend to ignore the equity, inclusion, and social justice portion. The idea that social justice, it's a political concept. It's not social justice. It's a political agenda that's being pushed. Mm-hmm. So whenever you confront them on it, they try and make it as if their words are just fluff. It's not a big deal. We're just questioning these things, sparking a conversation. Yet they declare anything they disagree with as words have violence. And you're right. We've seen this push to reimagine college in a sense, where I've noticed the mission and vision statements of a lot of universities and colleges throughout the United States have actually pushed this idea, changed their mission statements to include this idea of global citizenship. Mm-hmm. Can you explain to the audience how that fits into Brutal Minds, this concept of global citizenship?
Well, I don't address global citizenship explicitly in this, but I think—
But it relates.
Oh, yeah. The idea, if you can get people to abandon their loyalty to their family, abandon their loyalty to their community, abandon their loyalty to their country, and instead embrace some sort of raft of values and principles, say emanating from the United Nations or any other kind of the World Economic Forum. And I've seen a lot of students do this. I see them citing the World Economic Forum as data rather than citing United States statistics or the United States Constitution, that kind of thing. When you can shift a person's loyalty from they've grown up with and what they quite properly ought to be loyal to, I'm going to be normative in this particular point, and shift that to a loyalty to a greater good, however you want to define that, and it becomes a very big vessel in which anything you do or do not do can be related to this greater good. And they keep it as abstract as they possibly can, very much like social
But they
justice.
do make it as if they are the moral and the self-righteous
Exactly.
holy warriors. And if you don't
Exactly.
follow them, then you're an immoral person.
Yeah, Thomas Sowell addressed that very point when in his book years ago, The
The
Anointed.
anointed ones.
Yes, they feel themselves as they're the anointed one. And Nick, that goes back to Plato's cave. And I try to tell parents and I try to tell my students that what you're hearing on the left side of campus, the soft side of campus, it all goes back to Plato's cave. This is nothing new. Plato's cave comes out of the Republic, where we're all in a cave and we can't really see the reality except the shadows in front of us. There's one of us makes it out of the cave and sees there's a big bright reality outside the cave, and he's going to come back in the cave and try to teach us, those of us with false consciousness, and take us out of the cave as well into the bright light of realization and critical consciousness. This is as old as Plato. Alfred North Whitehead said, all of philosophy is a footnote to Plato. And so when you put it this way, and you put these anointed characters, the folks who are attracted to critical theory, hidden access to hidden knowledge, then that is denied to you and me. Of course, it makes them feel special. They feel intoxicated. It's attracted generations of graduate students into this. They use we're going to interrogate, we're going to transgress, we're going to unpack, we're going to talk about marginalized voices. It's a whole lingo that they adopt. And they're intoxicated, right? They're drunk on it, and it positions you and me and others like us over here, and they're somehow over here trying to bring us into the light, a la Plato's cave. So it is a very elitist. It's I think Lenin referred to it as the vanguard, and Marx referred to it as the vanguard. This is all, we've all seen this before. It's a kind of a repetition. It's Einstein's definition of insanity, where you do the same things over and over again, and expect a different result. And that's kind of the basis of it, I think, a lot of it.
And two more questions. So first, don't we see that these people are really frauds? I mean, just take the university system as a whole and the administrative state within the university system, as you pointed out, 12-1 progressive to conservative. When we look at it as a whole, you have these university systems that charge tens of thousands of dollars for one semester, several $100,000 for 4 years to get an undergraduate degree. Their endowments, billions of dollars in endowments. They're taking all this money from foreign entities and from multinational corporations that they rail against. And don't you see how fraudulent they are, particularly when it comes to hiring adjuncts, right? So we know that the administrative bloat on college campuses has increased tremendously. And yet full-time lines have been shut down. They're hiring part-time adjuncts, paying them peanuts. Doesn't that show that they're really frauds?
Well, there's a fraud being perpetrated on several levels, and you addressed one, the idea of hiring lots of adjuncts and reducing the number of lines of actual professors who are actually able to aspire to and obtain tenure. I think so, and I think that that plus the bloat of the bureaucracy that we've been talking about, the idea at Stanford, you have 15,000 bureaucrats for 15,000 students, thereabouts, a single bureaucrat for every student. And you wonder, what are these people doing? What they're basically bloating the bureaucracy to attain their power, to obtain funding for their programs, to build their own empires, and to obtain sort of personal largesse. But the result is a university that is virtually debilitated with respect to its traditional mission. And this traditional mission is under attack. And I can't seem to get my colleagues to understand this. I don't know about your colleagues, but
it's very difficult.
It's very difficult because they absolutely refuse to look at the facts in front of them and see that this is indeed happening. I'm hoping that that's going to change. I have my fingers crossed, and I have high hopes for the future.
Well, and I think you are starting to see some changes because, like I said earlier, I've seen a number of professors that identify to the left of the political spectrum that are now coming under fire because they misspoke. They violated one of their taboos. So I think it may start to change. But that leads me to this question, and probably the most important question. What should we be doing? What should ordinary people be doing in order to push back against this movement? What should the politicians, the officials be doing? What should college professors be doing? And is this something that is organized and coordinated towards this Marxist push, or towards the push towards internationalism, whatever you want to call it? Or has it taken on a life of its own and it's actually morphed into something that's really fragmented, but it's an idea that since people have gotten rid of faith and family, they've now replaced it with government?
Well, that's a complex question. I'll give a complex answer.
It certainly is.
I don't have all the answers, but I can point the direction to where the answers lie. And one thing is to recognize that the faculty is only one part of the problem. I mean, faculty are great people. I love my colleagues, but it's the bureaucrats, I think. And what has happened, and I'm going to mention Louis Althusser, the famous Marxist, the crazy Marxist, who wrote a book on reproduction of capitalism and the idea that capitalism reproduces its institutions. Well, what we have at the college campuses is this type of reproductive mechanism in the bureaucracy. I've mentioned the circle of vice, where these folks are pumping their own people into these positions created just for them, where they exert authority. And you mentioned fraud. This idea of the co-curriculum, where students are hammered with this message in brainwash fashion. And I highlight this in my book about how the brainwash is utilized by social justice educators and transformative educators. And this is the recognizing this mechanism, I think, is key to understanding how we can dismantle this mechanism, attack this mechanism, perhaps break off the off-campus version of the mechanism, which I do recommend. I name the culprits, I name names, name places, name methods, and I give recommendations. How can we think about breaking away part of this non-university structure that has become part of the structure, which is feeding these people into the university? Doing that, I think, is a big step in the right direction. State legislators ought to be investigating, and not faculty, but the bureaucracies. And Ron DeSantis made a point of this, I think, in his most recent speech. He says it's the administrators, it's the administrative entities in the universities that are causing much of the problems here. I think that on a more individual level, I give specific recommendations to students and parents who are in college now, the students who are in college now, things that you can do to emasculate the brainwashers, the thought reformers, and to get that education that you're paying for, that exorbitant price for, but how to neutralize the folks who are attacking you. And they are attacking you. I want to tell you this right now, Nick. Here's a book. Here's a brainwash manual called, I can't seem to get it up to show. Here you go. Teaching Diversity and Social Justice. Which is basically how to do a brainwash in chapter 4. I think you can read that and learn how to do it. That is a large part of the problem here. And if we can identify the culprits, identify what they're doing, we can go a long way toward putting a stop to it. Because right now, most people say, oh, it's an undifferentiated group of people up there. We don't know who they are, and we're expressing our outrage. And that's not very effective. What is effective is targeting these individuals, people like this Tyrion Steinbach, who at Stanford encouraged the people to shout down the judge, and she was removed. And when we begin to identify the individuals who are perpetrating this sort of thing, we can then demand accountability.
Yeah, and then maybe we could change and actually move towards competency and merit, which should be the necessary function. Stan, great book, Brutal Minds. Everyone needs to check it out there. Visit campusreform.org. Go to PASreport.com. I'll have links up at the PAS Report to the book and to follow Stan. Really appreciate you coming on. It's a conversation we need to keep going. Thanks a lot, Stan.
Thank you. I appreciate it, Nick.
Brutal Minds, the dark world of left-wing brainwashing in our universities. Everyone needs to check it out. I really enjoyed the conversation with Dr. Ridgley. I have the links up at the PAS Report website, PASreport.com, so make sure you check it out and follow Dr. Ridgley's work. If you found this podcast informative, be sure to share it with your family, friends, and on social media. Take 30 seconds to leave a 5-star rating and to write a review if you can on any podcast platform that allows it. I want to thank you for joining me today. I will be back on Wednesday. We're going to talk about the Trump indictment, so expect another great episode of the PAS Report podcast.
Thank you for listening to the P.A.S. Report Weekly Roundup Podcast.
Have a good one. Bye.
Be sure to rate, share, and subscribe to the podcast so you'll never miss an episode. Also, visit PASreport.com and follow us on Twitter at PAS Report.